All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. Now, with the start of the 2021 college football season right around the corner, one of the questions that has to be answered, and that is who is going to be able to slow down the Ohio State Buckeyes in the Big Ten Conference. Now, you look at Ohio State, they enter this season looking to win the Big Ten Conference for the fifth consecutive year, as the Big Ten Conference Championship game has been their personal playground. It's been a seamless transition for the Buckeyes from head coach Urban Meyer to now Ryan Day, as we saw Ohio State reach the national championship game last year before faltering to the eventual national champions in the Alabama Crimson Tide. Now, of course, Justin Fields is no longer the starting quarterback for Ohio State, as he is now in contention to be the starting quarterback for the Chicago Bears in the National Football League. But one thing that we have seen from Ohio State over the years, and that is this: just like any other good college football program, they simply do not rebuild, they reload, and there's always talent there. Now, all eyes are going to be on redshirt freshman quarterback CJ Stroud to see if he can be in that seat and take care of business at quarterback for the Buckeyes. But make no mistake, there is plenty of talent around Stroud on offense. You look at junior running back Master Teague, and this guy, you know what? He has some wheels on him. Two big time quality wide receivers for Ohio State, and Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. And these guys are going to go out there. They're going to make big plays. Of course, Ohio State is going to look to run the football first. And when opposing defenses key or attempt to key on Master T, guess what? It's going to open things up for Olave and Wilson in those secondaries. Now, of course, you have to wonder, will Ohio State be able to continue their reign over the Big Ten? And they have a very good chance of it. They do have some tough games that they have to worry about right out of the chute. They will travel to face the Minnesota Golden Gophers and PJ Fleck. After that, they will host Oregon out of the Pac-12 conference. And of course, Oregon could be in the mix themselves to win the Pac-12 and eventually possibly get to the college football playoff. And then once you get down to the meat and potatoes of Ohio State's schedule, on October 30th, they will host Penn State in a contest that could decide who wins the Big Ten East. And then they'll finish up the regular season on the road in Ann Arbor versus Michigan. So Ohio State, once again, they're going to be in the mix. Too many athletes on this team, too much talent, and the Buckeyes are going to be right there in the mix to win another Big Ten conference. Speaking of contenders in the Big Ten, you have to look at Penn State, and they are looking to bounce back after a subpar 2020 college football season. Penn State lost their first 5 games in 2020. They rebounded and won their final 4. And for head coach James Franklin, he is looking to carry some of that momentum into the next college football season. You look at Penn State, and they want to get back to their winning ways, of course. They had posted 3 New Year's Six bowl bids in the previous 4 years, and I think they have the talent to be in the mix to not only win the Big Ten, but also possibly get back to a New Year's Six bowl game. Senior quarterback Sean Clifford, he has had a couple of years under his belt as Penn State starting quarterback, and I think he wants to go out there and finish his collegiate career on a positive note. There's plenty of speed at wide receiver for the Nittany Lions when you look at Jahan Dawson as well as Parker Washington. On the defense, Penn State, you think about them and it's all about linebacker U, and they have another solid one in senior middle linebacker Ellis Brooks. But Penn State, they're going to be able to make some noise in the Big Ten. But the big thing for Penn State is they have a very tough schedule. They begin at Camp Randall versus Wisconsin, which is never an easy place to play. They step out of conference on September 18th to host Auburn out of the SEC. But then you look at this Big Ten slate coming down the stretch, excuse me, at Iowa on October 9th. And Iowa City is never an easy place to play, especially if that turns out to be a night game. October 30th at Ohio State. And just like I said, that contest could decide who wins the Big Ten East. And then Penn State hosts Michigan on November 13th. So these are going to be some games right there that are going to go a long way in determining what Penn State is able to do on the gridiron in this upcoming season. Now, one of the biggest questions when you think about Big Ten football is this: will Jim Harbaugh and Michigan be able to ever figure out Ohio State? And you look at the Buckeyes for the most part of the last 2 decades, they have really dominated the Michigan Wolverines. And most notably recently, they've gotten the best of Jim Harbaugh. And, when you think about Michigan, you think about one of the most storied programs in all of college football. But Michigan has never reached the Big Ten Conference Championship game, and they haven't won this conference outright since 2003. And, right now, this season, Michigan looks like they're going to pin their hopes on junior quarterback Cade McNamara. He's got to go out there and he's got to get the job done, and he's got to put points on this board for this Wolverines offense. You look at senior running back Hassan Haskins; he's going to have a big part of this, a big part of this offense, rather, because when you think about Harbaugh-led teams, they always are physical and they always know how to run the football. Michigan is going to have the talent on defense because when you think about this club under Harbaugh, they've always been solid and very stout on the defensive side of the football. Michigan's problem is scoring points at times, especially against the premier programs in the nation. Michigan does have a lot of big games this season. They host Washington out of the Pac-12 on September 11th. They're at Wisconsin on October 2nd. Never an easy game for Michigan or any road team for that mark going to Camp Randall. At Michigan State on October 30th. And this is a situation, Michigan is more talented than Michigan State this year. But remember, the Wolverines did lose to the Spartans last year. At Penn State on November 13th. And then finally, they host Ohio State on November 27th. And one thing that we've seen from Harbaugh, he has the ability to rack up the wins. Of course, last year was a very disappointing 2-4 campaign for the Wolverines. But nonetheless, Michigan has to find a way to go out there and beat those big teams. Most notably, they got to find a way to beat Ohio State. But the biggest problem for Michigan is they're getting recruits, but their recruits, number one, they're not on the level of the guys at Ohio State. And number two, they're not developing like the guys at Ohio State, especially on the offensive side of the football. And that right now is what is holding Michigan back from winning the Big Ten championship. You look at some of the teams in the Big Ten West, and the Wisconsin Badgers, they continue to chug along under head football coach Paul Chryst. You think about what Chryst has done. You think about what Wisconsin has done for more than the past 25 years as far as being one of the top tier programs in the Big Ten Conference. Sophomore quarterback Graham Mertz is going to get his opportunity to go out there and do his thing in his Badgers offense. But when you think about Wisconsin, it's all about what they could do in the trenches and on the defensive side of the ball. Number one, 4 seniors on this offensive line for the Badgers, and that is going to be very important. And then you look at this defense, and I talk about the physicality that Wisconsin brings to the table and the quality linebackers that they continue to churn out year after year. You look at senior middle linebacker Jack Sanborn. In my book, he's going to be a Butkus Award candidate. And you also look at the other inside linebacker in Leo Chenell. These guys are going to go out there. They're going to set the tone for this Wisconsin defense, and points are going to be at a premium versus the Badgers. The Badgers, they're going to be in the mix once again to win the Big Ten. They have some tough games on the slate. They host Penn State to begin the season on September 4th. They're going to host Notre Dame at Soldier Field in Chicago on the 25th of September. Then you think about them, Michigan coming to town on October 2nd, another big game. They host Iowa on October 30th, and then they're at Minnesota on November 27th, which is not going to be an easy contest for the Badgers, but they're going to be right there in the mix in this Big Ten Conference. Nothing fancy about the Iowa Hawkeyes under head football coach Kirk Ferentz, but they continue to win. You think about Ferentz, he has his system there, a quality D, quality offensive lineman. He always gets the quarterbacks who are game managers, and that's all a part of his program. Now it's going to be junior quarterback Spencer Petras to try to go out there and keep things rolling. But you look at Iowa, they can run the football with junior running back Tyler Goodson. And I think about this defense, which includes senior free safety Jack Kerner. They're going to once again be a problem for a lot of offenses in the Big Ten Conference. Iowa's going to look, obviously, to reach the Big Ten title game for the second time in program history, but it won't be tough because they have some tough games. They host Indiana on September 4th, and the Hoosiers are more than capable of pulling off the upset in Iowa City. At Iowa State on September 11th, and Iowa State is a very good team entering this college football season out of the Big 12 Conference, and there are people who feel that Iowa State can win the Big 12, so that's going to be a very difficult game for the Hawkeyes right there in Ames. Iowa will host Penn State on October 9th, and like I said, Iowa City is always a difficult place for opponents to play. At Wisconsin on October 30th in a game that could decide the Big Ten West. And another key game for the Hawkeyes this year is when they host Minnesota on November 13th. And you think about what they did to the Golden Gophers 2 years ago when Minnesota came to Iowa City undefeated and they suffered their first loss of the 2019 college football campaign. And speaking of the Golden Gophers, PJ Fleck is going to look to continue to advance his program. Of course, we saw that breakout year for Minnesota in 2019. They took a little step back in 2020, but Fleck wants to show that, 2019 was no fluke. And I'll tell you what, one thing, this is a very senior-laden group that the Golden Gophers have. And that has to account for something with all of that experience. Tanner Morgan, their quarterback, is a senior. Running back Muhammad Ibrahim, who can run the football just better, almost as good as anybody in the nation. Senior wide receiver Chris Outman-Bell, another guy, who's been there and done that in this Golden Gophers program. 5 seniors on the offensive line, so that's a lot of cohesion on that side of the ball. And then you think about the defense led by senior defensive end Boye Mafe. So I look at Minnesota, they're going to be seasoned coming into this this upcoming season. Of course, the Big Ten West is difficult, but I think Minnesota really has a chance to dance with the prom queen when they begin their season by hosting Ohio State. Not an easy game, but if Minnesota would be able to pull off the upset in that one, I think it would really springboard this program for PJ Fleck. Easier said than done when you think about beating Ohio State. At Northwestern on October 30th, the Wildcats are never an easy team to tangle with, especially after they won the Big Ten West last year. At Iowa on November 13th, at Indiana, and I talked on November 20th, and I just talked about how tough that the Hoosiers could be this year. And then finally, they finish at home versus Wisconsin. And when you think about a couple of years ago, Wisconsin went to Minnesota and punched the Gophers in the mouth, basically, and defeated them and got the axe. Paul Bunyan's axe in that game 2 years ago. And I think PJ Fleck wants to send that message to his program to say, hey, you know what? These guys don't respect you, and you got to get tougher if you're going to win this division and ultimately potentially win the conference. You look at Nebraska, they're trying to take the next step under head football coach Scott Frost. Then I know that they're under investigation right now, but I think it'll be big for this young Huskers team if they could find a way to be bowl eligible here in 2021. Nebraska is going to rely on junior quarterback Adrian Martinez, but they have a tough slate of games. At Oklahoma, their former Big 8 and Big 12 conference rival, on September 18th. They host Michigan on October 9th. At Minnesota on October 16th. They host the Buckeyes on November 6th. And then they're at Wisconsin on November 20th. And then finally, they finish up at home versus Iowa on November 26th. So you know what? It's one of those, if you are Nebraska, if you're going to get those wins, you really have to go out there and earn them the old-fashioned way. Northwestern is going to continue to be a thorn in the side of the Big Ten's elite. I know that the Wildcats made the Big Ten championship game last year. It's going to be a little bit tougher this year, but Northwestern, you can never write them off. Purdue, I think they're going to be a little bit more competitive this season with junior quarterback Jack Plummer. They also have some talent at the skill positions with senior running back Xander Horvath and junior wide receiver David Bell. You look at Purdue's schedule, and they have a slew of interesting games. They host Oregon State out of the Pac-12 on September 4th, and if you notice a theme here, a lot of Big 12 and Pac-12 teams are getting it on this year in non-conference play. At Notre Dame on September 18th, and the Irish cannot overlook the Boilermakers in that contest. Purdue hosts Minnesota on October 2nd. They're at Iowa on October 16th. They host Wisconsin on October 23rd. They're at Nebraska on October 30th. A very tough one as they travel to Columbus to take on Ohio State on November 13th. And then you think about them taking on Northwestern at Soldier Field in Chicago on November 20th, while they finish up at home versus Indiana on the 27th. So the Big Ten is definitely going to be a gauntlet this year. A lot of tough teams in this conference. There are going to be some teams, more than enough teams, that are going to be bowl eligible to represent this conference. But I think it comes down to Ohio State and Wisconsin once again. This would be the third time in the last 5 years that these two clubs have met in the Big Ten Conference Championship game. And unfortunately for Wisconsin, they've come up short. And I think that trend continues right here. I think Ohio State could possibly lose a game in the conference this year, potentially. But with that said, that doesn't take away from the Buckeyes. I still think they'll win this conference, and on top of that, I still think that they will be in the mix for the college football playoff once again. Too much talent at Ohio State. They are the class of this division. Pardon me, the class of this conference, rather. But with that said, I do see some teams making improvements this year. I see Penn State getting back on track. I see Michigan having a good season. I'm not sure if it's going to be enough to silence the detractors around Jim Harbaugh. Iowa is going to once again be tough in the West. Minnesota is going to be there. Nebraska and Northwestern will be in the mix, as well as Purdue. But the bottom line is, this is such a difficult conference. It's easy for teams to get lost in the shuffle. But nonetheless, like I said at the beginning of this live, that it's all about who's going to be able to get past Ohio State. And like I keep saying, they are the class of this conference. And until somebody knocks off the Buckeyes, they are still the team to beat in the Big Ten. So, folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you have not already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. You can check it out, drop a line, and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. So once again, fine folks, my name is William Martin, signing off, saying take care and have yourselves a wonderful day.